Hi and welcome to Inquiry Question 5 of Module 7, Organic Chemistry. And today we're going to start looking at the reactions of organic acids and bases. But before we do that, there are still some organic compounds that we haven't looked at naming. And the one that we're going to look at today is investigating the nomenclature of organic chemicals up to C8 of simple methyl and ethyl branch chains, including amines and amides. And later we'll move into their structural formula, properties, and so forth. So looking at what an amine is, it is basically, if we look at an ammonia group, we can see here that we have one N with our three H's around the nitrogen group. An amine is when we replace one of those hydrogens with a carbon chain, and that then makes it an amine. Now we have different kinds of amines as we have with many of the others. Actually, I'll go back. We have got our primary, our secondary, and our tertiary. Now, what's the difference between the two of these? So, like our alcohols, we can classify them based as primary, secondary, and tertiary. And in the case of amines, it depends on how many carbon chains are bonded directly to that nitrogen atom. So, in this first example here, you can see we just have one carbon chain off that nitrogen group. In this case here we have two, and in this case here we have three. So one being primary, two being secondary, and three being tertiary. So let's look at our naming principles associated with them. So the first thing we're going to do here is we are going to look at our carbon chain. We're looking for our longest carbon chain. And we are wanting our nitrogen group to be on the lowest number. So if we look here, we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we're going to name it from this side. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Because this gives the lowest number for the nitrogen atom to be attached to. So we've got a 4 carbon chain, which tells us that it is the prefix of but. They're all single bonds, so it's a butane. Our locator number, which is where the nitrogen is attached to, is number 2. So our suffix for this one is going to be amine. So what we look here is we have our but, so we have got our butane for being a single bonds. We drop the E and we're going to add our amine. And as we've discussed before, our locator can go in the front, 2-butanamine. But as we've already noticed in class, sometimes we find that 2 located within the name. Another and more correct way would be our butan 2-amine. Now, if you do go and look on the internet, you can see different ways of naming these. You can see sometimes butyl, 2-butylamine, and sometimes you can see aminobutane. There's a whole lot out there. Common consensus is that we're going to stick to this naming system here. So butan 2-amine would probably be the most correct way of naming for this system of alkanes. So let's have a look and try another one. So let's look at this group. So CH3NH2. So let's look at this one. We can see here that we have our amine group. And looking over here, we have a methane group, so we can see it's a meth group. it is single bonds, so it's an ane group, and the only position is carbon 1, so there is no need for a number there, so we'll call it methanamine. For that one. Let's look at another one. CH3, CH2, NH2. So again, looking at this one, we have a 2-carbon chain, so it's an eth group. If we were to draw that out, put in our hydrogens, you can see they are all single bonds, so it's an ane group. Again, in this case, it's attached to the end carbon, so it's a 1, and either carbon in this case is still a 1, and the suffix is our amine. So remember, we write them all as one word. Ethanamine is the name then for that compound there. So let's have a look at a secondary one. Okay, so looking at our secondary amines, and our secondary amines are when our nitrogen is bonded to 2 other carbon groups. So in this case, we do have a secondary amine here. So again, we are naming the amine using the longest carbon chain. So on this side there is only 1, on the left hand side there is 3. Again, we name with the nitrogen at the lowest possible number, and here it is attached to the 1. So the 1, the 2 and the 3. So our longest chain is our propane. Again, it's single bond, so it is a propane. The lowest number locator is the 1. Now in this case over here, we have a methyl group attached to that nitrogen. So our amine is going to be named using the longest chain, so it's going to be a propane or propanamine, because that is the longest carbon chain. And we then have a methyl group. How are we going to name that methyl group? That carbon or that methyl is attached to the nitrogen, and our only real way of naming that is it is attached to the nitrogen there. So we're going to name it with a capital N, is its attachment point. So we have got propanamine, and it's attached at number 1 is where the where it is attached, because it could be in a number of spots. So in this case, it's going to be N-methyl, 1 propanamine. So let's have a go at another one of those. So let's draw one. Let's draw in our hydrogens. So in this case, our longest chain is our bute chain. It's all single bonds, so it's an ane chain, and we then have off the side an ethyl group, obvious by the fact that it's 2 carbon chain, so it's an ethyl group. That ethyl group is attached to the N there, and it's an amine suffix. So we have got it attached to the first carbon. So naming our ethyl group, we have got our N-ethyl, and then we've got our bute amine. So we've got our group attached to the nitrogen there, and here we have got our main chain with the amine group attached. So looking at a tertiary group. So recapping here, our tertiary amines are named the same as our secondary amines. The only difference here is we have 2 alkyl groups now attached. So if we look at our nitrogen here, you can see that there are 3 carbon groups attached off that nitrogen. So we need to determine which is our longest chain, and our longest chain is coming along this way here. So to the left, so this will be our carbon 1, our carbon 2, 3, sorry, tricked again. Down here, carbon 1, carbon 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we have a pentane group, ane because they're single bonds. So we've got the pent group, single bonds, ane. The nitrogen is attached to the 2. So straight up we're going to have a 2-pentanamine or a pentan-2-amine being the preferred name. And now our naming system, we have a methyl group off here and an ethyl group off here, and they are both attached to that nitrogen. So that being the case, we need to name them both as N-methyl and N-ethyl, and as per our naming conventions, we name alphabetically. So in this case, it is N-ethyl, N-methyl, pentan-2-amine. You can see there that I have got it named differently. That name is likely to be accepted as well, but the preferred name is with the N-ethyl, N-methyl, pentan-2-amine. The best way that we can work with a lot of these is to have a lot of practice. So my suggestion is to go through the questions that we have looked at and have a go at naming those again with the correct system of naming. Have a go at those questions that you've been given in class, and we'll go through a little bit more later. Thanks for watching. See ya.